The 79th UN General Assembly opened on Tuesday. World leaders, policymakers, and international stakeholders are once again gathering in New York to address the world's most urgent challenges and issues related to peace and security. For more, we turn to Professor Hans Schattle this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Dami.
So this year's theme for the General Assembly is leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations. What does that say about this year's edition?
Well, I think for one, the UN is trying to take the long view and look at the big picture globally again in the aftermath, or near aftermath anyway, of the COVID-19 pandemic, the worst of it. I think public health took center stage for a few years at the UN, and now I think they're trying to broaden out. Quite literally, the Palestinians will not be left behind this year. They're now going to have a seat at last at the UN General Assembly, though they're not yet a full member. There was a resolution earlier this year to give Palestine some additional rights while keeping Palestine an observer rather than a full member of the UN. And I think the war in Gaza, the conflict between Israel and Hamas in particular, will be a front burner issue as well, because there's, of course, very high pressure at this point for the two sides, for Israel and the Palestinians, to reach a ceasefire in that conflict. That conflict was not going on the last time the UN General Assembly met. It began, of course, in October of last year when Hamas attacked Israeli civilians. So this is the first big meeting where they'll be trying to address this. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be speaking at the General Assembly. And he's, of course, long accused the UN of being anti-Israel. So that should be a very interesting speech. And Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will also be speaking, both of them on the same day. So that will, I think, be a major issue as the summit goes forward.
Definitely, geopolitical tensions, especially the Gaza conflict, will no doubt top the agenda. On top of that, Iran is also attending, reportedly looking to, rekindle talks about the broken nuclear deal with the West at the General Assembly. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it is unlikely that Iran is going to get what it's looking for here, but its president and its foreign minister are making the case to try to restart movement towards some sort of a nuclear deal. Again, this was agreed to during the Barack Obama presidency, and then Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the agreement, which weakened the agreement. There were several European countries involved as well, so I think the EU member states are also on the receiving end of lobbying from Iran right now. But there are a couple of factors here. One, Iran has been clashing at times and even attacking Israel during this war involving Israel and Gaza over the past year. And that will not exactly bring about an appetite for negotiations on nuclear weapons there right now. Even the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has been criticizing Iran over that. And the other factor is, with the U.S. presidential election, I think the last thing that the Kamala Harris campaign would want to do at this point would be to try to extend something approaching an olive branch toward Israel at this juncture, toward Iran at this juncture, because I don't think there's popular support in the U.S. for another nuclear deal with Iran. When Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out, he did not suffer any kind of backlash in public opinion. But I think if there were movement toward reestablishing that deal, it would come back to haunt the Democrats. So for that reason, I don't think the Biden administration would be on board for it either.
So you're saying the EU and the U.S. will probably turn down the proposal from Iran. But I would like to ask you, why is Iran bringing this deal again at this year's edition?
Well, I think they're looking for investment, and they're looking to be seen as less of a rogue nation globally, and they're looking for anything they can do to further advance their economy. And certainly the previous agreement was one way to do that. So money is often one factor.
Well, on top of that, on top of Gaza conflict, we also have to talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be there again to, beg for stronger support from the West. Do you think that will be realized?
That's interesting. And we just saw, of course, the news coverage earlier in your report, Dami, about the statements from Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader. basically threatening the West not to loosen the restrictions on long-range missiles potentially being used from Ukraine toward Russia. Putin claiming that would put NATO at war with Russia, which is going to sound quite threatening to leaders in the West. But Volodymyr Zelensky will be at the General Assembly speaking later this month, and he's looking for further reinforcements from the West. I think we'll certainly see another resolution from the UN. We've seen previous resolutions from the UN criticizing Russia, and this leads to an interesting issue because another topic on the agenda this year at the General Assembly is going to be potential reform of the Security Council. Russia, the belligerent, the invader here of Ukraine, it is one of the 5 permanent members on the UN Security Council, and especially since its attack on Ukraine, there's been some renewed pressure to try to think about how to rejig the composition of the Security Council. So the 5 countries that were basically at the helm of world power after World War II in 1945 when the UN was founded, so they would no longer have disproportionate voice on the Security Council. This would be Russia, China, France, Britain, and the US. So I don't think those 5 countries are necessarily going to agree to UN Security Council reform this year, but the fact that people are talking about it shows some dissatisfaction growing, I think, with Russia's position at the UN Security Council. And I think there will be some sort of symbolic reinforcement for Zelensky, even if it doesn't necessarily help him kick the Russians out of eastern Ukraine any.
Professor Schattle, before I let you go briefly, another notable figure at this year's assembly is North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee making presence for the first time as a foreign minister since 2018. Why the presence now?
I think this is very interesting, Dami. And of course, we can juxtapose this with the report that you just aired a few minutes ago about Kim Jong-un and basically flaunting the uranium enrichment facilities in North Korea. To me, this suggests that Che might try to make some sort of statement at the UN saying that North Korea wants to be seen as a member of the nuclear club, more legitimated nuclear power. I mean, who knows what she'll say? I don't think anybody really has an idea, and I haven't seen much speculation in the news coverage as to what she would say. So I'm putting myself on a limb by saying that. But it seems between Kim's statement, which, as your reporter said, may be timed in advance of the U.S. presidential elections, but it's also coming, right at the start of the UN General Assembly with his foreign minister in New York. So they may be trying to make some statements for greater legitimacy. And one other thing, she's reported anyway by Japanese media to be likely having talks at this with Russian and Chinese delegates as well. So that may be the other, may not so much be her speech, but also what she does behind the scenes in New York and who she's seen as with in New York. And if she is seen with the Russians and the Chinese, it may suggest some sort of a growing alliance with those 3 countries in this part of the world. So definitely something to watch.
All righty, Professor Schattle, thanks so much for joining us this morning. You have a good one.
Thank you for having me, Donnie. Take care.